Welcome to That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast. This podcast was formerly the Cage Corner podcast, a spinoff of the Victims and Villains podcast. All the rules still apply to this one. All the movies we cover are chosen by our patrons at our $5 tier, and you guys can help us get mental health resources into schools and help us cover every Nicolas Cage movie ever made, because after all, that's why we're all here. Link will be in the description below, or you guys can go to patreon.com/victims and villains. Man, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Matthew Basil.
Welcome. Thank you. So we're here to talk about Deadfall, 1993. I'm excited about this one. It's quite a famous one for Nicolas Cage, and I actually had not seen it till you had sent me the title. So.
Bro, I hadn't even heard of this movie before. The patron that picked this episode for us, I am Captain Nostalgia, by the way, if you guys are new to the show. I had never heard of it, and I Googled it. I knew that there was an Eric Bana movie called Deadfall, and I was like, I'm pretty sure he's not in this, and he's like, no, it's actually the 1993 version, and can we just, I don't know like what service you watch this on, but can we talk about the poster for this movie alone? How it's supposed to be this like almost like sci-fi looking movie, and Nicolas Cage has no mustache in this poster at all. And I'm like trying to figure it out. That's why the first time we meet him, I'm like, there's no way that can be Nicolas Cage. Sure enough, it's Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I don't know, because I do. First off, by the way, I want to thank the patron who picked this one, because although I would not call this a feel-good movie, it is way lighter than the movies we've recently been doing on this show. So thank you for that. But yeah, it's I don't know if it's because I know Nicolas Cage kind of. First off, this is like a Coppola family movie. His brother Christopher Coppola co-wrote it with Nick Valonga. He directed it. Nicolas Cage's aunt, Talia-Shara, is in it. His other brother is in it. So it's definitely a Coppola family thing, and he was kind of allowed to make this character how he wanted to. So I don't know if the poster was, kind of made before he did it, or not, because he apparently just showed up on set with that toupee and that mustache and the contact lenses, and his brother was just like, "Yeah, go for it." So
we learned this with Never on Tuesday. You don't. I both love and hate when directors are like, Nicholas, you can do whatever you want, because you get characters like his like the man in red from Never on Tuesday, and then his character in Deadfall, which I gotta say, like, Deadfall is I'm normally like heist movies. It takes a while, like a real special element to like make me like a heist movie. And I gotta say, like, we were texting back and forth as I was watching this, because you watched it before me. Once Nicolas Cage, spoilers, once Nicolas Cage dies, like, this movie kind of deflates itself, and then you meet two other characters that I'm sure we're gonna get into, that ended up actually being some of my favorite characters in this movie.
Oh, you're talking about Charlie Sheen's character, and then the diamond guy. Yes.
Oh, man. We can talk about those guys in just a little bit, but
yes. Especially, honestly, I was disappointed Charlie Sheen was only in it for as little as he was, because I mean, honestly, if they just made this movie, those two characters and Nicolas Cage's character, I could have watched this thing, I think, for like 2-3 hours easily.
Easily, yeah. Nicolas Cage is like, I want like a Nicolas Cage backstory of his character Eddie, because Eddie's such a unique character. So I guess let's go ahead and get into the what the actual plot of the movie is. So Deadfall, it tells the story of this guy that he's a con artist, and he's he's always had this like father-son duality relationship in the con. Like he was kind of the mark, and his father was basically the brains behind the operation, and he would so it's played, that guy is Joe, is played by Michael Banya. I probably mispronounced that name. If I did, I'm super sorry. But he basically, his father dies early in the movie, and so he travels to California to kind of get into the family business with his uncle, and that's where he meets Eddie and Diane and Morgan, Fats Grip, and Dr. Lime, and like all of these other elements, and then he ends up getting conned himself. That's basically what Deadfall is, but it's so much more than that. Like, Deadfall is such a weird movie to talk about because it's such a straightforward con movie and heist movie, but yet somehow it has all of these weird elements in it to help it stand out, make it a bad movie by general audience standards, but still make it somehow like a fun, weird, just entertaining ride.
Yes, that is what I took away from it the most, because it got not very good reviews when it came out. You know,
it holds a 0% right now on Rotten Tomatoes, just to kind of tell you guys.
There, yeah. So I was being somewhat generous by saying not good reviews. But I think that the reason is because, like you said, on one level, it's this kind of very straightforward heist movie. It's, has this kind of moral almost that, hey, don't scam people, which is the whole point of these con artists, heist movies, like, The Heist, I think, was one that was titled, The Italian Job, obviously the Ocean's 11 movies. It's in that vein, and by that standard, it is kind of dry and not very interesting. But then they add these cartoonish elements into it, almost. And I say cartoonish in a good way, as long as you're okay with that being added into this movie, which I guess people weren't. Because you have, like you said, Morgan Fats Grip, you have Eddie, Dr. Line, these characters that almost belong in like some kind of Saturday Night Live skit or some kind of cartoon on Cartoon Network, and it just kind of takes this thing into a whole nother like realm, and that is just, if you kind of look at it that way, it becomes a whole nother movie.
Like, I feel so bad for Michael Pena, who is the lead actor in this, because I feel like so much of this movie and so much of this conversation, at least for me as a viewer, I have so much more to say about Cage and Dr. Lime, and even to a degree like Sarah Trigger, who plays Diane, was also another valuable addition to this cast, I thought. I will say, though, at the end, with her setting Joe up to be a part of her dad, that was something I didn't actually see coming. And that was something I was like, okay, cool. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed like being surprised in that way. But man, this movie is just it's so weird. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward like heist movie meets like family drama, where you have a son that is grieving. He's basically going to do the last will of his father, and he's reconnecting with his uncle, and there's a whole bunch of like family dynamics that they try to unpack. And how did you kind of feel about some of the family drama in this movie? Because for me, it wasn't really worth my time. Like, I was like, this is the portion of the movie where I found really predictable and really paint by numbers in that regard.
Yeah, I found the same way. I felt that the dynamics between those characters, the dad dies, Joe's dad dies, and I'm going to use quotes because, spoiler alert, he doesn't really die. It's all part of a con. But he dies I think within like the first 5 minutes of the movie. So you never kind of really get to see their relationship play out on screen. You're just taking Joe's word for it. And then the relationship between Joe and his uncle, it just feels very, I mean, aside from that one scene when they're celebrating his birthday, you just don't feel any connection. And that's really, if I took it as the whole hinge of the heist part of the movie, the moral of the story or the message of the story was that, you know, Joe kind of felt a relationship in it and with his uncle and legitimately liked him, and then kind of ended up killing him and being part of this con that resulted in his death, and that just destroyed him, you know, his kind of moral fiber and crossed the line for him. But the weight of their relationship just wasn't enough to really deliver that. It was just kind of like, okay, I get what you were doing there, but I didn't feel it. You just kind of pointed it out like you were telling me.
Yeah, and especially there's that scene with Joe and his Uncle Lou where he hands him the cake and he's like, I was going to propose to your mother. Like, I really loved her. And you're like, okay, like unnecessary information here. Like, you know, backstories. Like, we have no ties to Joe's mother. And for that, even for in that term, we don't even have any connection to Joe. Like, they're giving him this like Dick Tracy like voiceover. Like, this movie tries so hard to go for that noir detective feel, and like it just doesn't work. And I feel like a lot of this film's like biggest problems is either predictable cliche, or in one hand, or in the other hand, it's completely out of tone and out of sync from the rest of the movie, and it's just really wild, crazy, unpredictable. But those are the best parts of this movie. Yes,
exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I wanted to like Joe throughout the whole movie. I really did. I wanted to connect with him because he loses his dad at the beginning. So you want to get that. At least I did. I wanted to get that emotional investment. Oh, okay, you lost your dad. You know, you were raised as a con artist by him, and you know, and I wanted to feel for him and connect with him. But he just comes across as, like you said, he has that voiceover. He's just kind of I know he says he's supposed to be this. His role in the cons are supposed to be kind of this gullible person that just kind of isn't smart, but really is smart and picks up on it. But again, they kind of tell you that. So you kind of go in and like, okay, but you don't really see it. He ends up getting conned at the end, and, you know, he doesn't do anything that's really clever that makes you really be like, yeah, that's awesome that you just did that. And there's nothing to really sink your teeth into with his role, and therefore him being the main character and being the relation to all these other characters just falls flat. And I don't think it's necessarily the actor's fault. I'm not sure. I just think it's just the script was just never really giving us, you know, there were no flashbacks to his mom, which is supposedly like the key element to this relationship between his dad and his uncle. And there's just no flashbacks. I honestly don't even know fully what happened. They were both interested in her, and somehow she did a con with one of them and got killed, but married the other one. And it's very confusing. So you just end up feeling kind of lost throughout the whole thing. And you're just kind of being told by this voiceover as to how to follow along in the story.
Well, so for that one, I would argue that like the mother, you know, you have Uncle Lou says something this way, and Joe's dad says something this way, so you have this like back and forth of like conflicting accounts of really what happened. And I think I'm so glad that you brought up the script, because there are times where I would be like, I don't understand why this character does this, or you know, did they really just say that? And some of it was in the way that the script was brought to life, and it was in its delivery, where it was kind of like, man, like that, this is a really rough movie. Like what am I watching? And then you have other parts where it's like, I wonder how much of this is like improvised, and if it is improvised, like to what degree. And a lot of those, I think, come from Nick Cage's parts, and
well, I think Nick Cage, I don't know how much of it improvised, but I mean, that was just, I mean, he's on a whole, that's the problem. Like, Nick Cage is phenomenal to watch, as is Charlie Sheen as Morgan Fats Grip, but they play like they're in a different movie.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that throws you. So you love watching them, and then they shift that, but you're like, it's a shift. So you're suddenly like, you're in with this Joe character, and you're trying to figure him out in this very noir, dry, deadpan detective story. And then all of a sudden you have Eddie, huffing glue and just, karate chopping people. And you're just like, we just went into a whole different movie here. Like, well, let's just let it, let's just let fly then.
Yeah, it's got weird dynamics, but that's also kind of why I liked this movie. Like, it's not an inherently good movie, but it's a movie that I will say kept me entertained, and it's kind of like good in the sense of like The Room or Showgirls or other movies that I would go back to watch knowing that they're terrible, but still being like entertained by them and being able to like laugh at how bad it is. Because a movie is a matter of perception, right? Like movie is art. So like, just because, we have critics on Rotten Tomatoes saying that this is one of the worst films that has ever been done in the year 93 or any year really, holding that, very sacred at 0% is one thing, but it's also, how are you interpreting it? How are you looking at it? Are you looking at it for its writings and the normal mechanics of what makes a movie, or are you having fun with this? I feel like if I was a critic, like I could see it from their perspective, but as a movie viewer and as a cinephile, like I want to have fun with this movie. I want to have fun with the movies I watch, and if should they be allowed it, because as soon as I said that, I thought about Schindler's List and I was like, that's not a fun movie. It's a very sad movie. But no, Deadfall is a very fun movie. And there are moments, like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely moments where this movie drags. And I think a lot of that comes from the tonal inconsistencies and like just the weak performances that this movie has. But man, like Eddie's another character in and of himself, and I think that's the fun of this movie. Whereas you feel like everyone else around this is just kind of very bland carbon copies of everyone. You have Eddie, who is just this complete wild card, or as he would say, Joker.
Yes. And you were very correct in that movies are an art form, and not every movie necessarily wants to do the same thing. There are movies out there who just simply want to entertain. I mean, I've said this before to you and amongst our writer staff. I mean, every movie, every form of media has a message to deliver. But I mean, for instance, Deadpool's message is mostly comic. It's not trying to preach that Deadpool's actually doing good behavior or something like that. It's mostly for us to just laugh at how ridiculous he is. And there are other movies like Schindler's List, which are trying to get us to feel something and think about something and learn something. So as a heist movie, which is usually pure entertainment most times, or as pure entertainment as you can get, I don't think this really holds up. So I think if critics hold it to that standard, or heist fans hold it to that standard, it will fall flat. I have watched a lot of heist movies. I like them. I like the fact that you kind of don't know what's going on till the end. It's a little bit of a mystery involved. I personally saw a lot of this coming before it was revealed. It's just the way it kind of did it. Maybe because I've seen so many of them, maybe, it wasn't as, been done when it was actually made in 1993. But I kind of felt that it was not really up to snuff for, what heist films I know have come to be. It was very flat, like you said. But as an entertaining ride, to just see some very kind of interesting character performances, I think that definitely holds together. You have, like I said, Diane, which is kind of your femme fatale, but she does, I think, a nice job with it. You have Charlie Sheen being this very, God, I almost want to see this guy like have his own spinoff, because he just, to me, was this very interesting, almost unsettling villain in this. Dr. Lime was something out of a James Bond movie.
God, thank you.
And then, of course, you had Nick Cage being Eddie, which just was this guy who was just off the wall. So much so he actually kind of inspired me to for a character for a project I'm currently working on myself, because I just thought he was just he had that manic energy that I was kind of looking for a character I was working on. So that, in that sense, I think it did. And also, too, I want to add, I do not agree with the critics. I don't think it deserves a 0%. I don't think it was that bad. I've seen a lot more movies that were a lot more painful to sit through. There's some dry points, and like I said, it kind of drags, like you said, but it's not painful to watch. It's just not. There are some definitely uninteresting moments.
To your point, though, I want to say for a heist movie to be effective, you need the audience to be invested into the characters. Mm-hmm. Because Absolutely. If they're not invested into the characters, when the really like climactic parts of that movie come through, you're not going to have any connection to those characters. You're not going to care whether they live or whether they die. And Now You See Me, I think, is a great example of a heist movie that's done right, where you spend a really long time with these characters, these four main characters: Jesse Eisenberg, Woody Harrelson, Isla Fisher, and Dave Franco. And eventually by the end, you're all in for this movie, and then you have that big twist and that big reveal at the end, and it's done more effectively because of how fleshed out those characters are over the course of the film's duration. And here, I don't know if Coppola like understood like the movie he was trying to create, because there are moments where this feels just so like noir, like you have those like James Bond elements moments, and a lot of it comes down to, for me at least, was the way that it was staged and the way that it's written. And to case in point, the noir element, obviously, we've talked about it. There's entirely, from front to back, there's a voiceover from Joe that's kind of like chronicling you and like walking you through this journey of like how he left the game of conning and like how he got conned himself and he fell in love along the way and all this other stuff. And it's like, again, very by the numbers. But then there's a scene in particular. It's like, it's right before the Diane twist is revealed. It's an all black screen and Diane is standing under a streetlight. Like that to me just like screams like noir. And then you get sucked right back into this world. And I think that's one of the things I really hated about this movie, was the way that it could like bring me into this world and then it just as easily suck me out of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that it was not. It felt like a movie. You could kind of tell, at least I could, the movie Christopher Coppola wanted to make, but you never quite saw it materialize, was how I felt. And I agree with you. There were moments where he kind of got it, and then there were moments where he definitely was missing the mark. And that kind of pulled you out, because you wanted to get invested. Like I said, I wanted to like Joe. I wanted to get invested, but there was just nothing for you to grab onto, and you grabbed onto something, and then just as easily it slipped out of your hands. Figuratively, of course. So I think that was the problem with this movie. Like, it just never materialized to what it could have been, and I think maybe that's why it's so harshly judged. Is because it tries and it gets close, but it doesn't. I just reviewed a movie for Victims and Villains where I think I told you said it was one of the lowest ratings I gave, and I said it was because I saw the movie that they wanted to make, and it would have been so good if they had, and they messed up. Versus seeing a movie that you say, well, you got some things right, you put in a good effort, you didn't quite get there, but you got some good moments. This was a movie that could have been a lot better. and Christopher Coppola or the script. I don't know what the script or the direction. I don't think it was the actors, in all honesty, but whatever it was, just kind of fell flat and fell short.
I would argue that some of it is the acting, and it's kind of a mixture of both. Michael, who plays Joe in this, like, he had some like really like just like he just seemed like really uneven throughout the whole course, where there was like moments where like I really believed him, and then there were moments where I was like, man, like this guy's really phoning it in. But I think one of the most problematic elements of this movie is Sarah Trigger, who plays Diane, and she's kind of introduced as kind of like the sex symbol of this grifting world, and she never rises to that. Like, she goes to Joe's room, she sleeps with him, they quote unquote fall in love, but like she's always just like never allowed to be a person. Like, she always just seems like she's a sex object in this world. And that, to me, like, it got under my skin so much, because Trigger seemed like she had a lot to offer this role. Like, she seemed like she had a lot that she could have done with it, but it just felt like the script or the direction or a mixture of the two, like, just really held her back. And so she gets like really typecast as like this, like, just sexy bimbo almost. I don't know exactly how you felt about her, but like, to me, like, she just kind of felt like that archetype of like, just like damsel in distress, for lack of a better word.
I would call her more femme fatale. But yeah, I agree with you. She had, and again, I think she does capsulize this, what's wrong with this movie, because there are moments where I felt where you kind of started to see a little bit more under her skin, and those were really nice. There's this scene towards the end, where Joe's about to go do the big score basically for this job, and you could tell that she, at least at that point, I know she's now in on this con and everything like that, and she's kind of asking him to walk away from it, and actually the two of them, go off together. And I thought that was a really nice scene. There's a scene where they first meet in the car, and she kind of hints at some deeper things that she's, had to struggle to survive, and she uses her sexuality, as a weapon to,
but how much of that survive. Is a con?
Yes, well, exactly, and you're not sure, and that's why, because she's never fully fleshed out. You never are allowed to really get her under what makes her tick. In fact, once it's revealed the con, she literally she tries to refuse the money and then just runs off. And I kind of was a little bit surprised when the credits rolled and we never saw her again. I'm like, really? You're just going to leave it at that? Like, she literally walks out without any kind of like what went through her mind, what is her, role, what's her life, how much of that was part of the con, how much of it is just her feeling like she survived, how did her Joe's dad talk her into it? And that's the problem. Like, it was uneven. She was kind of put as this very superficial femme fatale role, and they kind of seemed like they had a backstory written for her that was very fleshed out, but they just never really did it. Even when they sleep together, again, spoiler, her and Joe sleep together, it's kind of done so quickly and to the point that I was kind of like, whoa, okay, that's a little... I mean, I know in movies they move things along to the physical level pretty quickly, but it's like they're literally like, adversaries, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, Joe's like, no, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry, I was a little harsh on you. I love you instead. Let's sleep together. And it's just like, and she jumps into bed with him. And again, it's probably all part of the con, but again, you don't know. Like, well, was she really having feelings for him at that point? Did she grow to have feelings for him? You get the sense that she definitely has feelings for him at the end, but it's just never fleshed out as to why she got involved and, at what point did she get emotionally attached. And again, it would have been really nice to get a little more detail with her and a little bit more backstory.
Yeah. So I guess let's move on to probably arguably the best part of this movie, and that is Nicolas Cage's Eddie.
Absolutely.
Like there's so much to unpack from this that I think, to me, one of my favorite sequences is, and I'm sure that to some degree this had to be improvised, was when he went into Diane's like apartment or house or wherever she was living, and like finds the cigar, and it's Lou's cigar, or at least the brand that he smokes. And so Lou just like stumbles in, just kind of drunk, but kind of like more angry, into his office, and just like throws like just a platoon of F-bombs towards this guy. And I did not hate it. I loved every second of it. It's such a good scene.
Pretty much any scene with Nicolas Cage. And for those of you who, want to see what we're talking about, what Nicolas Cage did in this movie, but don't want to sit through the entire movie, supposedly all his scenes are on YouTube in a compilation. Mm-hmm. So feel free to look that up, because if you're a Nicolas Cage fan, it's something to behold. But I think every scene with him in it, I don't want to, get down a rabbit hole here, because Heath Ledger's, performance as a Joker and what happened to him, it could be a whole episode in of itself. But I remember when The Dark Knight came out, I was working a job, and a coworker of mine was an actor, and I knew he had seen the movie, and I asked him, "Hey, what did you think of The Dark Knight?" And he said, "My God, it was so depressing." And I said, "Oh, what, it bothered you?" He's like, "I will never be able to commit myself to anything artistically like Heath Ledger did in that role." And I don't think Nick Cage necessarily got to what Heath Ledger was capable of. That, like I said, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because I could talk a whole hour just on what he did with his roles. But Nicolas Cage just commits fully to this role and just inhabits such a bizarre, energetic character, and almost a force of nature again, which is, like I said, what I think Heath Ledger was capable of, that it just every scene he is in, he just owns. And you just can't, at least I couldn't take my eyes off it. I just had to, was glued to the screen. And that was the one thing that, like I said, did pull you in, but it was on such a different level than the movie everybody else was in, that's, it wasn't enough to save the movie. But it's just the scene when my favorite scene, honestly, even though it's a violent scene, was the scene when he's in the strip club and he kind of realizes that Joe kind of duped him, and he just goes ballistic, and he just like starts throwing stuff, and he's dropping F-bombs, and he just starts taking this guy. I think he like tries to stop him, or is just there, and he just starts like karate chopping him and throwing him to the floor, and it's just he's just completely berserk. And it's that, again, that's why I bring up Heath Ledger's Joker, because it's that lunacy that you don't know where he's going to go with this, and you just don't know what he's doing, and he's just all over the place. It just makes you want to see what he does, and not you don't want your eyes to leave the screen.
Even our introduction to Eddie is so memorable. He sits down right next to Joe, and he pulls out this stack of it's 52 Jokers, we can only imagine. And he's like, "Tell you what, if it's a high card, I'll tell you who I am, but if it's a low card, I'll tell you who you are. Is that a deal?" And then he just kind of like so Joe picks up the card, and it's Joker. And you kind of learn that that's kind of like his shtick throughout the course of this movie. And when he flips it over, he's like, "Oh yeah." And he just has this like very high energy. He's like, "Okay, you're, Joe, like, how do you know Lou?" Blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how we get introduced to him. And he, I gotta say, like, just has some of the most awkward like scenes in this movie when you're talking about just what he does, and also too, like, he has a hitman sent after him for like no reason. Like, that's never explained at all. And no. But I'm kind of like, okay, like I'm about this, like He's crazy enough. Like it's believable enough that like he would have people after him to kill him.
Yeah, the guy I know the guy that he ends up killing, right, in the alley is what you're referring to. Yeah, I'm not sure if he was a hitman sent after him, because he's also in the bus when Joe, at the very beginning, is going out the West Coast. So I don't know if he was somehow protecting Joe. But yeah, it's never explained who he is, why he's there, if Joe's dad sent him, if it's Lou, sending him, if it's some gangster after Eddie who just, happens to, look like the guy in the bus maybe. That's, again, one of the problems with this movie is it just has so many ends that just never really gel together and get fleshed out. But that could have been cool if they were, fully realized. But yeah, it's just, again, going back to Eddie, it's just everything scene he was in, to me, was just this energy and this commitment to his character. There's this, there's a scene where he's, going berserk, in Diane's room, and he's just humping the bed, and it's just this, you don't know what he's going to do, and it's Nicolas Cage uncaged is what I thought of when I was watching this, that you just were absolutely seeing him just absolutely just throw himself in, and just I have to imagine that a lot of that was improvised, especially knowing his brother was directing it and knowing that he was allowed to make this character, that a lot of this was his idea and that he was kind of going with it. And it's that energy and just that craziness and, hey, I'm just going to see what works and throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. That was just great to watch as a Nicolas Cage fan, even though I know I saw a review on IMDb that said that this was Nicolas Cage at his worst, but I felt this was Nicolas Cage purely channeling whatever came to mind. Cage actually came in with this wig and the whole drug deal because he's on something clearly, because he thought it would be more authentic. And I don't know if it's necessarily authentic. I'm sure there's people like this out there. I don't think it's his worst role at all. I just think it's him channeling this, this mysterious but very high energy and very kind of unbalanced character, and just all over the place. And he's just so experimenting with what's this character can do and what's going to happen with this character and what he's going to do next. And his emotions are just all over the place. That to me, it was just, again, not maybe for actually what the movie called for, but as watching an actor just experiment with acting was just beautiful. And that's what I felt like I was watching.
I agree. Out of every Nicolas Cage movie that we've covered, whether it's Victims, Cage Corner, or this new venture that we're doing right now with High Praise, this is definitely top 5 Cage performances or Cage characters. My top one still remains to be Donald Kaufman from Adaptation. So good. Red's a close second from Mandy, but this movie is interesting just because I think you're right. And I even wrote, like, when I logged this into my Letterboxd account, like, he has a lot of the same, like, manic energy, this character, that his character from Vampire's Kiss has, where it's almost that, like, meme-worthy like satire, and the dedication that he brought into the character, whether it's from the way that the character looks, even the way that he has this, like, fluidity, like the scene where we were talking about him specifically going into Lou's office with the gun. Like, there's a fluidity there to the way that he moves, like the way that he interacts between, like, him and Baby at the strip club. Like, there's definitely, like, he came in and, like, even got away, like, even the way that he drives, like, his car is unique to that character. And Cage almost seems like this, like, transformative, like, just like loose cannon investing into this character. And I feel like he's the most invested actor out of any actor in this cast.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think, like I said, he owns the character. He owns every scene he's in my opinion. Everything is consistent, with the character. But again, he's just such a loose cannon and so all over the place and so manic that you just want to see what he does next. And that energy is phenomenal. It's one of the things that, like I said, going back to Heath Ledger, that made me want to watch The Joker, and I think that so many people gravitated towards with that movie. And it's like I said, it's not to that extent, but it's definitely in that ballpark, I felt. And you bring up adaptation. I agree that was a wonderful role for Nick Cage, but that's more of, Nick Cage acting this persona, and to me, it was very true to form in a lot of ways to what the writing process is like and what it's like being an insecure writer. But in this, I don't know if there's, like I said, people out there, but I wouldn't say it's a role where he really embodies and you really believe it necessarily. Maybe it's not necessarily believable, but it is, and that's where it gets cartoonish, just like Morgan Fat's Grip, for instance. But it's so great to watch. And honestly, I felt sorry that he died before Morgan Fat's Grip came in, because I would have loved to have seen the two of them just play off each other and see what would have happened. But
no, you're absolutely right, and I guess that's a great segue into talking about one of the other better parts of this movie in the Grip character. Grip really feels like the tone that they're trying to set. He seems like the right antagonist, and they talk about him periodically throughout the movie. Like, he's kind of almost like a whisper, and then when you finally meet him, like, it's like, okay, like, I can understand this. And Charlie Sheen definitely leaves an impression, and I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but Carrie Elways from The Princess Bride and Saw was also up for the role, as was Tom Waits. Charlie Sheen was the actual guy, obviously, that got the role. But both of those actors, I think, would have done really well. But this is probably the best Charlie Sheen role I've ever seen. I haven't seen Charlie Sheen a whole lot, so that's setting a very low bar. However, for this movie, I think that I would have liked to kind of had a little bit more interaction with the world of Grip, because I feel like by the time that you actually get to him in the third act, like I said, like, they're whispers, but you almost forget about them because of everything else that's going on in the movie. Like, they don't really do a good job at building up the character, but Charlie Sheen definitely picks up a lot of that slack.
Yes. Honestly, Morgan Fat's Grip was kind of a curveball for me, because like you said, there are whispers of it. And his scene, by the way, I think I didn't check the actual runtime, but it's like 5-10 minutes. I mean, total. It might even be less than 5 that he's on screen. And it's a scene that's, like I said, at the very end, things are starting to ramp up. Nicolas-Cage's character, Eddie, again, spoiler alert, has just died. So you're kind of, to me at least, I was kind of mourning that. I'm like, what are we going to do with this movie here now that Eddie's gone? Because I just didn't see how this movie was, going to hold together without Eddie. And it didn't, in my opinion. But so I was kind of like caught off guard with like, whoa. And then this guy comes in, and I wish he was in more of the movie. Like I said, I want to see like a spin-off movie where he's just the main antagonist that, somebody has to go up against, because there is just this level of threat almost that he has, this like sinister vibe that he's just sending out, but a very cool, collected. He's basically a pool shark. It's a pool scene that he's in. And he has these pool gloves, these leather pool gloves on, and he has like his pinky fingernail like painted like silver purple color, and it's just, he's wearing like this. I can't even describe this jacket. It's almost like a smoker's jacket, but it looks like it's leather, and it's like got patterns etched in it, and it's just I think he even has like a little bit of a scar on his face, if I remember correctly. It's just. He embodies this character. He's not the manic energy that Eddie is, but he embodies this character. And I don't know if he made it this way or if he was told to do it, but he definitely owns it. And he has this gravity to him while he's on the scene, where you just, I was waiting for him to just kill Joe, and I would have been okay with it at this point because I would be like, all right, let's see the Morgan Fats Scrimm storyline, because Eddie's gone, so let's go with this. And I really, really liked his character and was really like, wow, this again almost belonged in a different movie. He belonged in a movie where it was on a whole different level than what we got in Deadfall.
I 100% agree, and he's a great introduction to this last act. I would argue the last act, this final grift that we experience as the audience, is probably the highlight of this movie outside of those two characters, because here you have this character that's very just the suave nature of what you think a good noir villain should be, and then you meet this James Bond parody in freaking Dr. Lime, who's played by Angus Scrimm from the Phantasm movies, and the lighting of his office feels like a Bond movie, and then when he goes, let's shake on it, and pulls out and reveals this gold prosthetic arm, I paused the movie, and I was like, are you serious right now? Is this really happening in this movie? I'm about this. Let's go. I had to collect myself for a moment, because I thought I was on LSD or something, because it's such a bizarre moment.
Yeah, honestly, at that moment was the shift for me in this movie, because you have Eddie, who's, like I said, this. We've talked about Eddie. You really just have to see Eddie's performance, to understand what it was. But okay, so he's off the wall. He's a little bit crazy, but you're still with this heist movie. Like you say, you're not invested in it, but you're going with it. And then, you see Morgan Fats Grip, and you're like, wow, okay, he's just this whole other movie, but you're like, okay, he's this sinister villain. And I kind of expected him to be the villain that was going to continue through, but then he gets taken back and we see Dr. Lime, and he's in this, like you said, this shadowy back room. He's got a bunch of women in leather clad mini skirts, so something out of I said 1970s, 1960s James Bond, and they're holding up an eyepiece for him, and he's doing the diamond. He's got this gray Dr. Evil wore, and Dr. No obviously was where Dr. Evil got her from. This gray one piece suit thing. I don't even know what it's called. And I'm just like, wow, okay. And then, like you said, he reaches out, and it's not just a gold prosthetic arm. It's got a blade, a huge giant scissor thing that he shakes with. And I literally had to sit there, and I literally had to wait for Joe to be like, oh, I thought you were going to cut my hand off, or, Dr. Lime's like, how did you know I wasn't going to cut your hand off? To really think that I'm seeing what I'm seeing, because I'm thinking I'm not seeing what I'm seeing, that I'm mistaken. And then I was like, no, he's got a giant pair of scissors for an arm. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm not taking this movie seriously anymore. Now it's a farce. It's a comedy. I'm just going to sit back and and laugh.
Were you taking it seriously up until the introduction of Dr. Lime?
Honestly, I was. Up until Dr. Lime, I was trying to take it seriously. It wasn't working too well, but I was trying to. Because you have this, like you said, this film noir, this very serious voiceover from Joe. You have this kind of tragedy at the beginning, and everybody, I thought it was supposed to be this very, heist movie that was, at least this film noir heist movie that was going to be taken seriously. But yeah, after Dr. Lime, I was like, okay, I get it now. This is a farce. It's not supposed to be taken seriously.
And you don't really see it till a little bit later in the movie, but when he turns his head, his he just looks like he got out of a high C commercial from the 90s, where he's got this wave, it's all of his hair's slicked back, but they have this almost kind of wavy nature to them. It kind of looks like, the way that you would draw fire on your notebook in elementary school.
Yeah. He's a character out of, like I said, a cartoon. Really, wow. You would expect it. I'm not saying Looney Tunes cartoon. But yeah, I mean, I've watched Saturday morning cartoons with characters like this, and that's what I'm saying. If you take this movie as a Saturday morning cartoon, it works a lot better than taking it as a thought provoking, heist movie examination on, con artistry kind of deal. It doesn't work that way. And Dr. Lime for me was the tipping point where I was like, all right, I get it now.
I found myself often like when Fats was like off the screen and it's like, okay, that character is not coming back. And then we're introducing it to Lime. And I was fully enthralled into Lime, like to the degree that I was with Eddie. Like I was like, I want more of this character. And then they're like, all right, we're going to do this, like bring back like all of these like other elements of the movie, like his dad has not been dead, it's been a con the whole time, Uncle Lou's dead. And I found myself kind of like I don't care about these characters at this point. Freaking bring back Dr. Lime. Like Dr. Lime, like there's a scene where it's like it's a shootout where it's like the con's gone wrong, similarly to how the film opens, but it's gone really wrong this time because of Dr. Lime's men. And then the FBI, it shows up and it goes really wrong. And then like there's a scene where like someone shoots at Dr. Lime and it breaks his scissor hand. And I was like, man, this movie's not that great, but that scene right there just made my top 5 favorite things about Deadfall.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think you said at the beginning, what we really need is a Deadfall 2 that just focuses on a backstory with Eddie and has Morgan Fats Grip and Dr. Lime in it as the antagonist, and we don't even need Dr. Lou or any of the other characters. We just need those 3 because those 3, were the highlight of this film, and they were on a whole different level, and they were just so interesting to watch. And so, and like everything in this movie, they weren't fleshed out all that much. You didn't get to know their backstory and what made them tick. Even Eddie, who was, had the most screen time by far, because Dr. Lime, I think, is only in it. I mean, he's in it for 2 scenes. He's probably in it for as much as Morgan Fats Grip is in it, maybe a little more. And but you don't get to see any of these interesting characters, and you don't even really get to know what makes Eddie tick, how he got involved with Uncle Lou, what made him get into cons. You don't get any of that, and you just want to see the more of these characters because they're just on a whole different level. And like you said, the other characters, when Joe's dad shows up at the end, I kind of saw that coming, really from the beginning, because I'm like, that's no. I mean, the whole way he died in the funeral scene, I was like, something's up with this. This was all staged. But because again, I've watched heist movies, so you kind of know to look for that stuff. And so, but when he shows up, you're kind of like, okay. And I kind of was hoping maybe he would have something, but when he's just like, I just want to get back at my brother, and and I just needed you to not be in on it so you can be believable. I'm like, I don't care. Can we just go back to Morgan Fats Grip and Dr. Lime, and can Eddie really have survived? And can we just? That's what I'm saying. And I was even disappointed with Diane. I was like, well, at least let's see Joe and Diane get back to let's get some more about Diane, and Joe and Diane end up together. But no, Diane's never seen again. Joe just walks out. I'm like, this is so flat. Like.
Well, so this movie right now, it was made for let's get into some fun facts for this movie. It had a budget of $10 million and had a box office return of 18,369. Talk about your bombs. We've covered some films on here before that had like bombs, but this one might actually take the cake for one of the biggest bombs. It was released October 8th, 1993. As we've said, it stars Michael Banya, Sarah Trigger, Nicolas Cage, James Coburn, Peter Fonda, Charlie Sheen, Talia Shire, and the aforementioned Angus Scrimm. The movie was co-written and directed by Christopher Coppola, and also, as you previously said, Matt, was co-written by Nick Falonga.
I'm not sure. I might have butchered. I don't know. That's how I would have said it, but I'm not sure. So our apologies, Nick, for mispronouncing your last name.
But this is probably the most interesting tidbit of information I came across in researching this. Is 2017, Nicolas Cage reprised his role as Eddie in the prequel/sequel called Arsenal. Arsenal was a direct-to-DVD action thriller. It was directed by Stephen C. Miller. It was written by Jason Mosberg. The film stars Adrian Greer from Entourage, John Cusack, Nicolas Cage, and Jonathan Schreier. I don't know. He most famously for playing Jimmy in That Thing You Do, and I kind of think this is on my watch list now. Like I want to see what Cage brings back to the role. It looks tonally just from the poster, it looks just tonally different.
Yeah, I might have to check it out, to just, like I said, see what he can do with Eddie again, because like I said, it was a tour de force. I mean, there's no other way to describe that. It's a tour de force of acting. It may not be the most, gravitas role. I'm not talking, De Niro or Pacino or, Brando here, but it is a tour de force performance for sure. And but I would definitely be putting that on my list if you told me that Dr. Lime and Morgan Fat Script were also back as well. But because I think, like I said, that's the movie we all deserve. But
it's apparently it's better than Deadfall because it holds a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Well, there you go. So it's up 3%. So it can't be worse.
All right. You got any fun facts for the listeners?
No, I actually don't. The most fun fact I had found was just that the Nicolas Cage kind of owned the role and came up with the whole thing himself and thought it was going to be more authentic the way he did it. But that was kind of the only thing I really found that I found interesting that you didn't mention. So. All
right. Well, the way that we're going to do this moving forward is because the show is now called That's High Praise. Does Deadfall 1993 deserve high praise? Yes or no?
I do not think it does. I do not. I think Nicolas Cage deserves high praise, as well as Morgan Fats, Charlie Sheen, and Dr. Lime. But I do not think the movie itself deserves high praise.
Yeah, I also am right there with it. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. There's a lot that I really enjoyed about this movie, but as much as I enjoyed about this movie, I also hated about this movie. And I actually bought this movie on digital. So
me too. I meant to rent it, but I accidentally bought it, so
nice.
I own it now. So I guess I can go back and experience Eddie anytime I want. Dr. Lime and Morgan Fat Script.
So I don't know. I think it's an interesting little piece of cinema history, but I think with that, it's gonna do it for us on this episode of That's High Praise. But where can people find you online, Matt?
Oh, I'm on Facebook under my name, Matthew A. Basile, Basile. So you can find my writing page on Facebook there, and that's pretty much where I keep updates on my writing projects.
Yes. Go follow him. We'll have links in the descriptions below. You guys can follow me on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia and my film journey. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, at Victims and Villains on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd, as well as the official site, victimsandvillains.net, which will get you guys access to all of those social medias, past episodes of Nicolas Cage content that we've covered, the main podcast, and mini-sodes as well, along with the Suicide Prevention Resource Library. Is the real reason why we create this content. So we just want to encourage you we're just going to leave on that note. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. There are 130 suicides as of this recording that take place every day on American soil. And when we look to international numbers, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That's one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can reach out to us on any of our social medias. Again, all of those links are going to be in the descriptions below, or go to victimsandvillains.net/hope, where you guys can find resources including the suicide prevention hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255, the text line 741-741, and additional mental health resources as well. We thank you guys for listening, and remember, if it's got Nicolas Cage, that's high praise.